I used to believe I understood my husband, Michael, every habit, every pause, every gentle smile he gave me at the end of a long day. For 7 years, I convinced myself our marriage was built on quiet trust, even when the silence between us started lasting longer than the conversations. But everything shifted the night his friends came over and looked at me like I was something they didn't recognize, or something they wanted to study. Their names were Brandon, Tyler, and Jace, men Michael had known since college, men he once described as brothers for life. I had met them only twice before, and even then, something about them felt unsettling. They carried themselves with a sharpness I couldn't place, a stillness behind their smiles, a deliberate focus in their eyes, as if they were always listening for something I couldn't hear. On this particular evening, I felt their attention long before they even knocked on the door. Michael kept glancing at the clock, at the window, at the hallway, as if preparing for something he dreaded. His restlessness made me uneasy, but he brushed off my questions with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. When the doorbell finally rang, the air shifted. Brandon entered first, offering me a greeting that sounded too smooth to be sincere. Tyler followed with a grin that didn't quite match the cold calculation in his gaze. And Jace, quiet, watchful Jace, stood at the threshold a moment longer, studying me in a way that made my pulse skip. Not flirtatiously, not rudely, but as if he was cataloguing details that mattered. Michael tried to act normal, but his tension betrayed him. Whenever I moved, pouring water, setting out snacks, even walking past the doorway, their eyes tracked me with synchronized precision. It would have been unnerving from strangers. But from my husband's closest friends, it felt like a warning. As the night unfolded, I stayed near the kitchen, pretending to be occupied. Their laughter drifted through the house, too loud, too sudden, too forced. Through the doorway, I occasionally glimpsed them leaning close, whispering things they didn't want me to hear. Each time I entered the room, their conversation cut off abruptly, as though my presence disrupted something fragile. At one point, I caught my husband's gaze. The fear in his eyes wasn't directed at me, it was directed at them. That was the moment I realized the central truth. Michael wasn't afraid of losing his friends. He was afraid of what they might do. And whatever secret sat between the four of them, whatever thing Michael had been hiding from me, it was no longer staying in the shadows. As I stood silently in the kitchen, listening to their voices rise and fall like a silent warning, one thought settled into my mind with chilling clarity. Something was wrong with them. And Michael knew exactly what it was. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but sometimes the truth doesn't wait for permission. It slips through cracks, floats down hallways, and finds you whether you're ready for it or not. That's exactly what happened when I heard my husband's voice drop to a whisper that sounded nothing like the man I married. "She's starting to notice," Michael said. My stomach tightened. He wasn't talking about bills or house repairs. He meant me. My awareness. My questions. My instincts picking up on something he was trying desperately to bury. Brandon's low laugh followed, sharp enough to cut the quiet. "Of course she notices. Humans always do, eventually. Humans." The word didn't fit. It didn't belong in a conversation between four perfectly ordinary men. And yet, something about the way he said it made my nerves prickle. Like I had been labeled other without my permission. Tyler added, "You can't hide it from her forever, Mike. She's your wife. She sleeps next to you. She'll sense it before long." Sense what? A chair creaked. A deep breath. And then Michael's voice, strained, exhausted, carrying a weight I didn't recognize. "I'm trying to protect her." I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. Protect me from what? Before I could lean closer, the floorboard betrayed me with a sharp crack. The room went silent, so silent it felt intentional, like the air itself was waiting. "Elena," Michael called out, but his tone wasn't soft or teasing. It was alert. Defensive. I stepped into the doorway, forcing my expression into something neutral. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." All three men turned toward me. Not quickly. Not naturally. Their heads lifted with identical timing, identical stillness, like predators scenting the air before moving. The unnerving synchronization made my heart skip, but I smiled anyway, trying to pass for oblivious. "We were just talking," Michael said, his voice a little too bright. Brandon's eyes narrowed with interest. About you, actually. I swallowed. Oh. He leaned forward. You're different than I expected. Tyler chimed in, stronger, too. Jace didn't speak. He just watched me with a stare so unblinking it felt surgical. I pushed a breath through my tight throat. Well, I don't know what you expected. No one answered. Their silence pressed against me like a physical weight. Michael stood abruptly. Let's take a break. Elena needs rest. It wasn't true, but I didn't argue. I walked toward the hallway, feeling their eyes on my back, heavy, calculating, almost hungry. When I reached the stairs, Jace spoke in a quiet murmur, his voice carrying farther than it should have. She's already changing. Changing? I froze mid-step. Before I could turn to ask what he meant, Michael's sharp tone cut the air. Enough. His voice held authority I'd never heard before, an authority they obeyed. But the damage was done. Their words clung to me like cold fingers, and one terrifying question echoed louder with every heartbeat. What did they think I was becoming, and why did they believe it had already begun? Emily had expected the evening to be quiet, a simple dinner, maybe a movie, and then an early night before her long shift the next morning. But the moment she stepped into the living room, she sensed something was wrong. Her husband, Daniel, wasn't sitting on the couch the way he usually did. He stood near the window instead, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the backyard as if he were watching for someone, or something. Dan, Emily said softly. You're scaring me. What's going on? He turned toward her too quickly, almost flinching at her voice. The shadows beneath his eyes made him look older, worn down, like he'd spent the last several hours fighting off an invisible storm. Emily, I need you to listen to me, he said, voice low but trembling. My friends, they're not coming over tonight. I didn't even know they were supposed to, she replied, trying to smile, trying to make sense of his panic. No, he whispered. You don't understand. They're already on their way. Emily felt the unease crawl up her spine. On their way for what? Daniel opened his mouth to explain, but a sound cut him off, a sharp, scraping noise against the back door, like claws dragging across wood. They both froze. The house suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too defenseless. Dan, what was that? She asked. His voice broke. Them. Every instinct in her body screamed to run, but she stayed rooted, searching his face for any sign this was a joke, a horrible, late-night attempt at humor. But Daniel wasn't smiling. He wasn't even breathing normally. His hands shook as he reached for her, pulling her away from the hallway. I should have told you sooner, he said, regret thick in his voice. They changed. Weeks ago. And now they're losing themselves. They don't think like people anymore. Another sound came, this time a guttural growl, heavier, closer. Emily felt her heart slam against her ribs. What do they want? She whispered. Daniel swallowed hard. You. Her breath caught. She didn't move. She didn't blink. The only thing that mattered now was the truth, the raw, terrifying truth, sitting between them like a dark, living thing. Why me? She asked. Daniel's answer was barely audible. Because I told them I loved you more than anything. And they want to take away what they think makes me weak. The back door shuddered violently, the wood creaking as something massive pressed against it. Emily grabbed Daniel's hand, her fear sharpening into a single, unwavering decision. Then we run, she said. And for the first time that night, Daniel nodded like a man who finally had hope. Emily had barely stepped into the dim hallway when the first blow hit the back door. The entire house quivered, dust drifting from the ceiling like shaken snow. Daniel tightened his grip on her hand, his pulse racing against her palm. She had seen her husband frightened before, during storms, during emergencies, but never like this. This was dread carved into bone. We don't have much time, he whispered. Then tell me everything, Emily urged, forcing her voice to remain steady as they moved toward the front of the house. Daniel hesitated, eyes flicking toward the kitchen where another growl reverberated through the floorboards. Before they turned, they were just my closest friends, Ethan, Mark, Tyler. Guys I trusted like brothers. But something changed them. Something they didn't fight hard enough. Emily swallowed, struggling to align the familiar names with the monstrous sounds clawing at their walls. Changed how? Their minds warped first, Daniel said. They became territorial, aggressive, obsessive. And then their bodies started shifting. The last time I saw them, they weren't fully human anymore. His voice cracked. And now they hunt. Instinct first. Thought second. A violent crash echoed from the back door, louder, closer, enough to splinter Emily's composure. Daniel, if they're after me, we can't just walk out the front door. They'll smell us, won't they? He nodded, jaw tightening. Yes. But not if we move before they circle around. They're fast, but not coordinated. Not yet. Emily forced herself to breathe through the rising panic. Then what's the plan? Daniel looked at her with a resolve she hadn't seen in him before. We go through the basement. There's an emergency exit I never showed you because I never thought we'd need it. Once we're outside, we head for the old ranger station. The walls are reinforced. They can't break through steel. The house shook again. Wood groaned. A low, animalistic snarl seeped into the cracks of the doorway. Emily met Daniel's eyes. And after that, he said, I figure out how to save them. Or stop them. But first, I keep you alive. His words weren't heroic. They were desperate, sincere. A promise made by a man standing on the last edge of control. The hallway lights flickered, shadows stretching across the walls as something massive moved outside the windows. Emily's heartbeat synced with every approaching step, every scrape, every predatory breath. Basement, she said firmly. Daniel led her toward the stairs, their footsteps quick but silent. Behind them, the back door finally gave way with a deafening crack. Emily didn't look back. But she felt the creatures entering the house, felt their hunger, their fury, pressing down like a second heartbeat chasing her. And the night was only beginning. Emily followed Daniel down the narrow basement steps, each creak of the wood amplifying the chaos unfolding above them. The air grew colder as they descended, carrying the metallic scent of old pipes and stored tools. A faint bulb swung from the ceiling, casting jittery circles of light that made every shadow seem alive. Daniel moved with urgency, but not panic. Emily clung to that. If he fell apart now, she knew she would too. Daniel, she whispered, how long have they been like this? He paused only long enough to unlock a heavy storage cabinet. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of finally confessing everything. It started months ago. Before you noticed anything wrong. He pulled out a flashlight, a folded blanket, and a small metal box Emily had never seen before. They were experimenting with something. A ritual, a challenge, some twisted dare. Ethan told me it was harmless. Just a joke. But jokes don't change people into predators. Emily felt a coldness deeper than the basement chill. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Daniel shut the cabinet with a soft thud. Because I thought I could fix it. Because I thought it would stop. Because I didn't want you to look at me the way you're looking at me now. She didn't realize she had stepped back until she hit the wall. It wasn't anger that pushed her, it was the sudden understanding that the danger had begun long before tonight. And she had been living in a house built on secrets. Before she could respond, a thunderous impact shook the ceiling above them. Dust rained down in a fine grey cloud, sparkling in the trembling light. They're inside the kitchen, Daniel said quietly. Emily's pulse hammered. Then we move now. He nodded, crossing the room to the far corner where a large shelving unit leaned against the wall. He gripped one side and pushed, revealing a reinforced metal door with a horizontal locking bar. Emily stared. You built this? After the first time I saw Ethan shift, Daniel replied. I knew I needed a way out if things got worse. The admission hit her harder than the crashing above. He had been preparing for disaster alone. The ceiling groaned again, claws scraping the floorboards. A deep, resonant snarl drifted through the vents. They're tracking us, Emily whispered. Daniel lifted the locking bar. They're trying. The metal door squealed as he pulled it open, revealing a narrow concrete tunnel leading into darkness. Cold, clean air drifted in, a promise of escape. Emily stepped beside him, her fear sharpening into determination. Once we're out, you tell me everything. No more secrets. Daniel met her gaze, guilt and resolve intertwined. You deserve the truth. And I'll give it. But as they entered the tunnel, a heavy thud slammed against the basement door behind them. The creatures had found the basement. And the chase was no longer a threat, it had begun. The tunnel swallowed them in cold darkness, the air thick with the echo of their hurried footsteps. Emily kept one hand on the rough concrete wall, the other gripping Daniel's arm as he led them forward with the small flashlight. Every few seconds, she glanced over her shoulder even though she knew she wouldn't see anything until it was too late. Behind them, the distant thuds against the basement door grew sharper, more deliberate. The creatures were learning. They weren't human anymore, yet something inside them still understood how to pursue a target. How far does this tunnel go? Emily whispered. About 200 feet, Daniel said, his breath unsteady. It opens behind the old tool shed near the woods. Once we're out, we head straight for the truck. Emily nodded, though her mind churned with questions she hadn't dared ask until now. Daniel, why are they focused on me? Why not you? He slowed, just for a heartbeat, and she felt the shift before he even answered. Because you were the last thing they fixated on before they changed, he said quietly. It was at that barbecue weeks ago, remember? When they kept staring at you. I thought they were just being idiots. But they weren't. Something was already happening inside them. They were choosing a target. The memory hit her like a cold slap, the way Ethan's eyes had lingered too long, the way Tyler had stood too close, the strange tension she had brushed off as awkwardness. Now that moment felt like the beginning of the end. So I'm prey, she whispered. No, Daniel stopped completely, turning to her. His voice was firmer now, steadier. You're the one thing I will not let them touch. Do you understand me? Before she could answer, a deep, echoing crack reverberated through the tunnel, the unmistakable sound of a door giving way. Emily's breath hitched. They're in the basement. Daniel grabbed her hand. Then we run. They sprinted through the narrow passage, the flashlight beam shaking wildly across the walls. The air behind them grew warmer, pulsing with movement. Snarls carried through the tunnel, low, guttural, hungry. Emily pushed herself harder, her lungs burning, her legs trembling. The fear sharpened her focus, driving her forward with a clarity she had never felt before. Finally, the tunnel widened into a small chamber where a metal ladder led upward. A faint sliver of moonlight shone through the trapdoor above. Go, Daniel urged. Emily climbed, the rungs cold beneath her palms. She shoved the trapdoor open and dragged herself out into the night air. The wind hit her face like a promise of survival. Daniel, hurry. He climbed after her, but before he reached the top, a furious roar exploded from the darkness below. Emily's blood turned to ice. They weren't just being chased anymore. They were being hunted. Emily hit the ground running as soon as she cleared the trapdoor, the cool night air slapping her face and momentarily numbing the terror coiling in her stomach. Behind her, the distant sounds of the basement, cracks, thuds, guttural growls reminded her that the danger was relentless. Every step forward was a defiance, a refusal to become prey. Daniel followed closely, his flashlight illuminating a narrow path between thick underbrush. Moonlight glinted off his determined eyes, yet she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Despite the fear, he moved with precision, leading her like someone who had memorized the terrain in advance. Keep going, he urged. The truck's by the ranger station. We'll be safe there. Emily stumbled over a root, barely catching herself. How did it come to this? She gasped, heart hammering. They were your friends, your closest friends. Daniel's jaw tightened. And they still are, in a way. But the bond broke the moment they embraced what they were becoming. They don't think like humans anymore, they think like hunters. And they've decided you're the one to punish me. A shiver ran down her spine. The idea of friendship twisted into this primal, dangerous force was almost too much to comprehend. Why didn't you tell me earlier? She asked, words trembling. I thought I could protect you, he said, voice rough. I thought distance, secrecy, everything would be enough. But once they started changing, it was only a matter of time. And tonight, I was too late. Emily's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse into the darkness, but instead, she ran. Every step became a silent vow, she wouldn't be claimed. Not by them. Not by fear. They burst into the clearing near the ranger station, the silhouette of the truck like a beacon. Daniel opened the passenger door while Emily scrambled to slide in. She slammed the door just as a deep, resonant growl echoed from the edge of the woods. Shadows shifted unnaturally, taller and wider than any human, moving with terrifying grace. Daniel jumped into the driver's seat. "Hold on," he shouted, and the engine roared to life. The creatures, once men he had trusted, emerged from the tree line, their forms twisted, claws digging into the earth, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. They moved with uncanny coordination, yet something in their hesitation betrayed recognition. They were hunters, yes, but still tethered to memories of friendship, of loyalty, of past bonds. Emily gripped the edge of the dashboard, heart hammering. She could feel their gaze, burning through the dark, their awareness of her every movement. And though the truck's headlights cut through the night, the forest seemed endless, their pursuers tireless. Daniel slammed the accelerator. The tires churned dirt, the engine screamed, and for a fleeting moment, Emily allowed herself a fragile surge of hope. But deep down, she knew, the night was far from over. And the real test, the fight for survival, for truth, for love, had only just begun. The truck rattled violently over uneven forest terrain, tossing Emily against the door as Daniel maneuvered around fallen branches. Her fingers dug into the edge of the seat, nails biting into her palms. Every snap of a twig behind them, every low, guttural growl, made her heart spike. The creatures were relentless, moving faster than any human should be able to. "Emily, stay down," Daniel shouted over the roar of the engine. "They're smart, they know we're heading for the station." She ducked lower, breathing sharp and fast. The headlights carved twin paths through the dense shadows, revealing fleeting glimpses of movement, elongated shapes, claws catching the moonlight, eyes glinting with an unnatural hunger. Once, she thought she saw Tyler leap from a tree like some twisted shadow, only to vanish again into the darkness. Daniel's voice broke through her panic. "I need you to trust me, fully. No hesitation." She swallowed, her throat tight. I do. Her words caught in her chest as she tried to articulate the mixture of fear, betrayal, and disbelief twisting inside her. "How can you still call them friends?" His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white. "Because they were once my friends. But loyalty can become obsession. And obsession becomes dangerous when it's unchecked." The forest opened into a clearing, the ranger station rising like a fortress against the starless sky. Its walls were cold, unyielding, steel reinforced. Daniel aimed for the narrow gate, tires skidding in the loose dirt. Emily braced herself, the truck's engine screaming against the night. A sudden crash shook the roof, rattling the rearview mirror. Emily's stomach dropped. One of them had caught up Brandon, she realized, his form larger, more monstrous, moving with impossible speed. The others followed in eerie silence, save for the faint crackling of branches beneath their feet. Daniel slammed the brakes, skidding to a stop just inside the gate. "Get out. Now." Emily didn't hesitate. The moment her feet hit the ground, the cold metal of the station's wall pressed against her back. Daniel handed her a flashlight and a heavy wrench, his eyes locked on hers. "If they get in, we fight. We survive. Together." Her fingers closed around the wrench. She felt her pulse settle into a rhythm, fear transforming into resolve. She had been terrified minutes ago, paralyzed by disbelief, but now adrenaline and determination sharpened her senses. She could see the glint of eyes in the darkness, hear the subtle shifts of movement, anticipate the angles of attack. Daniel reached for the heavy steel door, sliding it into place with a loud, final click. Emily pressed herself against the wall, flashlight sweeping the shadows. The sounds outside shifted, low growls, scratching, the snapping of underbrush. They were waiting. And in that moment, Emily realized something chilling. The fight wasn't just about survival. It was about truth. About what Daniel had hidden. About what had driven his friends to this monstrous form. She tightened her grip on the wrench. Because whatever came next, she knew she could no longer run. The steel door rattled violently as Brandon slammed against it, each strike echoing through the ranger station like a war drum. Emily pressed her back to the cold wall, wrench held tightly in her hands, every nerve screaming with anticipation. She could hear Daniel's breath, steady but tense, as he checked the locks and peered through the reinforced window. "They're not going to stop," he muttered, almost to himself. "They never do." Emily swallowed, gripping the wrench harder. "Then tell me the truth, Daniel. What did you do to them? Why are they like this?" He hesitated, jaw tight. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. It started as a game, an experiment, something stupid we all thought we could control. But it went too far. Too far. Emily echoed, disbelief and fear colliding in her chest. "They've become monsters. You've been hiding it from me this whole time?" Daniel looked at her, eyes glimmering with guilt and desperation. "I didn't want you to see them like this. I didn't want you to see me like this. I thought I could fix it alone. I thought I could protect you." Emily's stomach churned. "Protect me, from them?" She motioned toward the door, the violent sounds of snapping wood and claws punctuating her words. "Yes," he whispered. "But protecting you isn't enough anymore. They've changed in ways I never imagined. Their minds, their bodies, they're not human anymore. But I love them, too. That's what makes this worse. They're my friends, my brothers, and I failed them. And I failed you." A deafening crash shook the station. Emily spun, flashlight illuminating Brandon's massive, twisted form as it tore at the door. Eyes glinting with feral rage, he let out a low, throaty roar. Behind him, Tyler and Jace moved like shadows, limbs contorted, unnatural. Emily's grip tightened on the wrench. "Then we stop running. We fight. We survive. And we save them if we can." Daniel nodded, a hard edge of resolve settling over his features. "Yes. But first, we have to understand what they've become. Only then can we undo it, or end it if necessary." The growls and scratching grew louder, more coordinated. Emily realized with a jolt that these weren't mindless attacks, they were deliberate, strategic, almost intelligent. Her pulse surged, but her fear transformed into clarity. She and Daniel were no longer merely fleeing. They were confronting the consequences of secrets, loyalty, and betrayal, the choices that had shattered their lives. Emily took a deep breath, wrench raised, flashlight shaking but determined. "Whatever happens," she said, voice firm, "we face it together. I'm not letting them, or you, lose control again." Daniel reached for her hand, gripping it with fierce determination. "Then let's end this. Tonight." Outside, the night seemed to hold its breath. The hunters were waiting. The truth hung heavy in the air, raw and undeniable. And Emily knew, with a cold certainty, that nothing, no friendship, no loyalty, no love would ever be the same after what was about to happen. The door shuddered one last time. Then silence fell. And the final confrontation was about to begin. The night air was sharp against Emily's skin as she and Daniel stepped outside the ranger station, the first real breath of freedom after hours of suffocating terror. The creatures had retreated, at least for now, shadows slipping into the tree line, their guttural growls fading but never entirely gone. Emily felt the weight of what had happened press down on her chest, each heartbeat echoing the chaos they had survived. Daniel sank onto a bench near the truck, shoulders slumping. "They're gone for now," he said, voice hollow, but his eyes were restless, scanning the woods as if expecting the shadows to spring back to life. Emily knelt beside him, still gripping the wrench from their escape. Her hands shook, but the adrenaline was ebbing into a quiet resolve. "Daniel, we survived. We made it through. But, what now?" He exhaled, looking at her with a mixture of gratitude and regret. "Now, we rebuild. We tell the truth. About what happened, about what I tried to protect you from. And maybe we find a way to save them. Or at least understand them." Emily nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle like cold stones in her stomach. The night had forced them into a reality that was impossible, terrifying, and irrevocable. But in that impossible reality, she realized something crucial. Survival wasn't just about escaping monsters, it was about confronting the truths we hide, even from the people we love most. They were your friends, she murmured, voice soft, almost afraid to name them, almost afraid to give them form again. And you tried to save them, even when it meant risking everything. Daniel reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. I did. And I would do it again. Because I couldn't let fear control what mattered most. You. For a moment, silence hung between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of loss, of betrayal, of the fragile human connections tested and nearly broken by forces neither of them fully understood. The woods whispered behind them, a reminder that the danger wasn't gone, only postponed. Emily breathed deeply, the cool air filling her lungs. She could still feel the shadows, the eyes, the instinctual hunger of those she had once trusted. But she also felt the tether that had always grounded her, Daniel, flawed but devoted, standing beside her. They had been tested, and they had endured. I don't know what the future holds, she said finally, voice steady. But I know we face it together. No secrets. No running. Just us. He nodded, a faint, tired smile breaking across his face. Together. And for the first time that night, Emily allowed herself to believe it. Not that the danger was gone, not that the horrors wouldn't return, but that she and Daniel had survived more than just a chase. They had survived the truth. The wind shifted, carrying the faint rustle of leaves, and Emily let herself smile softly. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't peace. But it was a beginning, a fragile, tentative start, in a world forever changed. They walked toward the truck, hands clasped tightly, hearts steadying against the dark. Behind them, the night waited, indifferent but patient. And ahead of them, the first light of dawn hinted at the possibility of hope.